The world was quiet, too quiet. People were going about their normal routines, unaware that everything was about to change forever. It started like any other day, the sun shining bright in the sky, cars moving through the streets, and families sitting down for breakfast. But then, something happened that no one could explain. At exactly 8 a.m., every screen around the globe, television, smartphones, computer monitors, flashed the same message. It didn't matter where you were, whether you were in the United States, Japan, or a remote village in Africa. The message appeared in bold red letters across every device. Stop attacking, or do you stop pretending to be civilized? No one knew who had sent it. The message was clear, yet cryptic, and it sent shockwaves through every corner of the world. There was no warning, no explanation, just those 6 words that seemed to hang in the air like a heavy cloud, causing fear and confusion. Across the globe, people stopped in their tracks. Some sat in front of their televisions, staring in disbelief at the screen. Others turned to their phones, refreshing news apps to make sense of what they had just seen. Social media exploded with speculation. Who sent the message? Why now? Was it a joke, or was something much more serious at play? Within minutes, governments were scrambling. Leaders of countries, once focused on their daily concerns, now found themselves in emergency meetings. Security agencies around the world began working tirelessly to trace the origin of the broadcast. But the message seemed to come from nowhere. There were no known signals or broadcasts, no trace of any sender. The world's leaders were confused, frustrated, and scared. The message was too direct, too urgent to ignore. Whoever had sent it was demanding something, and the question on everyone's mind was, what happens if we all listen? In New York City, the streets were bustling as usual. People rushed to work, families walked their children to school, and the hum of the city's energy filled the air. But that was before the message appeared. In a matter of seconds, the normal rhythm of life turned into a frenzy. Daniel, a 32-year-old software engineer, was on his way to work when his phone buzzed. At first, he thought it was just a routine news update, but when he saw the message, his stomach dropped. He stopped in his tracks, staring at the screen, his heart racing. He wasn't the only one. People around him were looking at their phones, muttering in confusion. "What does it mean?" someone asked, their voice full of panic. Daniel looked around. He saw people pointing to their phones, showing the message to their friends. Some were trying to call loved ones. Others were making frantic searches for answers, but no one knew what to make of it. The message didn't fit into any normal pattern. This wasn't an advertisement, or a government statement, or even a political warning. It was something else entirely. As Daniel stood there, trying to process what he was reading, another alert popped up on his phone. It was from a news source he trusted. It was a live broadcast, and the headline said, "World Leaders React to Mysterious Broadcast." He clicked on the link and watched as news anchors spoke in hushed, concerned tones. There were no clear answers. Experts were speculating about everything from cyber attacks to alien contact, but there was no solid information. No one knew what was happening, or what to expect next. And as the broadcast continued, the anchor's voice cracked with urgency. Across the globe, other countries were reacting in much the same way. In Tokyo, Japan, thousands of people crowded around large public screens as the message flashed. People were silent for a moment, then whispers began to spread. The streets, once filled with the hustle and bustle of daily life, now felt strangely empty as people retreated into their homes, unsure of what this cryptic message meant. In London, the reaction was similar. In a matter of minutes, news stations were flooded with calls from worried citizens. People who had been enjoying their morning coffee in local cafes now huddled around their phones, looking for answers. The Prime Minister called for an emergency meeting, and military forces went on high alert. Nothing made sense. But what terrified people the most was that the message wasn't some political statement, nor was it from a nation-state. It came from somewhere. else. In a small rural town in India, the impact was no different. News channels played the message over and over, showing it again and again, as people watched in silence, their minds racing. What did this mean for them? Could it be that their peaceful, quiet lives were about to change? In a place that had long been untouched by global conflicts, the news felt like a bad dream. Back in New York, Daniel couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. He had been sitting at his desk, trying to focus on his work, but his mind kept returning to the message. Stop attacking, or we stop pretending to be civilized. Who was the we in that message? And what did it mean to stop pretending to be civilized? The words seemed to suggest that something bigger was at play. But what could it be? Daniel's heart pounded as he thought about the message. The more he thought, the more questions surfaced. What was the attack they were referring to? Had humanity done something that had provoked this warning? Was this the beginning of something bigger? The answer seemed to elude him, but one thing was certain. The world was not the same as it had been the day before. People were afraid. The streets were quieter now, and every conversation seemed to circle back to the message. It felt as if everyone was waiting for something, the calm before the storm. Hours passed, but the sense of dread only grew stronger. Governments issued statements, but they were vague. They urged calm, but could not explain what was happening. Military forces went into high alert, and news agencies flooded the airwaves with endless speculation. Then, just as suddenly as the message had appeared, another broadcast interrupted all communication systems. This time, there was no message, only a symbol, an ancient, glowing icon that appeared on every screen for just a few seconds before vanishing. No one knew what it meant, but in that moment, fear gripped the world even tighter. It felt like something had just begun, something that would forever change the course of human history. The world wasn't ready for what was coming next. As night fell, people across the globe found themselves lying in bed, staring up at the ceiling. The message haunted them. What did it mean to stop pretending? Who was the one giving the warning? And what would they do if humanity didn't listen? The world could no longer pretend that everything was normal. Something was coming, and the question everyone was asking was, would humanity be ready when the time came to face the consequences? The world had barely begun to process the chilling message. Fear still hung in the air like a thick fog, clouding every conversation, every thought. Yet, as the hours passed, the unknown sender of the warning was no closer to being identified. Governments and military forces around the world were desperately trying to trace the source, but it was as if the message had simply come from thin air, vanishing without a trace. But then things started happening. Strange things. In the middle of the night, the first real sign that something was terribly wrong appeared. In the quiet of the American Midwest, a military base in Wyoming, known for its secrecy, suddenly went dark. No warning, no distress signal. All communication with the base ceased instantly, and the lights, which had been shining brightly just moments before, vanished into total darkness. Satellite feeds showed nothing but static where there should have been clear images. For hours, no one knew what had happened. The government sent in rescue teams, but they could not find a trace of what had occurred. It was as if the base had simply disappeared. Within hours, similar reports started to flood in from other places. Strange disappearances of military installations, communication blackouts, even entire towns where the people were gone, leaving behind only empty streets and abandoned homes. The incidents weren't confined to any one country or continent. The world was beginning to realize that something was happening, and it wasn't natural. In the heart of Paris, a team of scientists working on a top-secret project began to feel the first stirrings of panic. The data they were monitoring on their computers began to glitch, flashing images of strange symbols. And then, there it was again, the same mysterious message. Stop attacking, or we stop pretending to be civilized. The symbols were not familiar. They weren't human. And as the scientists watched in horror, One of their team members, a senior analyst, made a horrifying discovery. The data they were monitoring was coming from a source outside of Earth's atmosphere. It was faint, distorted, but undeniably there. Something, or someone, was sending a signal from deep space. But why? And who? Meanwhile, in Africa, the situation was becoming even more unnerving. In rural villages, once peaceful and far removed from global conflicts, strange lights appeared in the sky. They weren't planes. They weren't drones. These lights danced in the sky, moving in patterns that made no sense to the people watching them. At first, they thought it was some sort of meteor shower, but it wasn't long before the truth became apparent. This was not a natural phenomenon. Soon after the lights were seen, strange creatures began appearing in the villages. Small, shadowy figures, too fast to fully comprehend, moved through the dense forests. Villagers reported hearing eerie, high-pitched sounds at night. Those who ventured out to investigate described seeing shapes that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. It was as if these creatures weren't bound by the same rules that governed the world around them. For the first time in history, the peaceful and isolated village was thrust into the chaos of the unknown. The world was no longer a place of safe, predictable order. Back in New York City, Daniel was glued to his computer screen, scrolling through the growing number of strange reports. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends, family, and colleagues, all wondering what was going on. The atmosphere in the city was one of unease. People moved slower, spoke less, and everyone's eyes seemed to be on their devices, waiting for news. Suddenly, a news alert flashed on the screen in front of him. Military forces confirm that the first strike from an unknown source has taken place. Communications and military bases have been targeted around the world. The origin of the attack remains unknown. Governments are calling for a state of emergency. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. The attacks had begun. The world was under attack, and no one knew by whom or what. The following morning, the reality of the situation sank in for the whole world. Every country, from Russia to Australia, reported some form of disruption. Some places were seeing complete communications blackouts. Others were being overrun by strange forces. It was impossible to ignore. The world's leaders scrambled to put together a plan, but every strategy seemed to fall apart the moment it was put into action. No one knew how to stop the attacks, or even how to fight back. In London, the Prime Minister addressed the nation, his voice tense with fear. "We don't know who or what is behind this. We don't know why they're attacking. All we can do is prepare for the worst and hope that humanity is strong enough to survive. This is not just a threat to our country. It is a threat to humanity itself." But even as he spoke, the people of London knew that no one was coming to save them. The sense of powerlessness was palpable. Across the ocean, in the Middle East, military officials were the first to realize that they weren't just fighting humans. In the desert, a group of soldiers came across something they could barely describe. Large, metallic structures rose from the ground as if they had grown there overnight. These strange objects appeared to be of alien origin, slick, black, and humming with an unknown energy. The soldiers attempted to approach, but the moment they came close, the structures emitted an intense energy pulse, knocking them off their feet and sending them scrambling for cover. The skies overhead began to shift, swirling with dark clouds and lightning. Was this a weapon, or something more? There was no doubt anymore. Humanity was under attack by forces that were far beyond anything anyone had ever imagined. As the days passed, the reports from all over the world grew more terrifying. Governments issued desperate calls for cooperation, but it was clear that the normal structures of power were breaking down. Panic was spreading faster than the unknown attackers. It felt as if the very fabric of civilization was unraveling. Some nations, in a last-ditch effort, began to evacuate their capitals, moving government operations to underground bunkers. But even those were being targeted. The attacks weren't just happening in major cities. They were everywhere. Nowhere was safe. The forces behind these strikes were methodical, strategic, and terrifyingly efficient. And still, the question remained, who were they? Who were these beings, these creatures, or whatever they were? And why had they chosen this moment in time to strike? The answer was out there, hidden somewhere in the chaos. But as the first waves of attack continued, it was becoming clear that humanity was running out of time to figure it out. The world was being torn apart by something they had never prepared for. And as every new attack occurred, the cryptic warning from the mysterious message echoed in people's minds. Stop attacking, or we stop pretending to be civilized. Whoever had sent that message had clearly been waiting for this moment. And now, humanity would have to face the consequences of their actions. The time to pretend was over. The world was about to learn what happened when civilization came to an end. The world was in chaos. What had once been a planet of order, structure, and familiar systems was now plunged into uncertainty. Cities were crumbling under the weight of fear, and humanity's ability to control its fate was slipping away with every passing day. The attacks continued relentlessly, and no one knew who or what was responsible. The question on everyone's mind was, who were these invaders? It wasn't until the third day after the first attacks that something truly shocking happened. It came not through any government official or military channel, but through a whisper, a strange signal that, unlike the previous messages, didn't carry a warning. This time, it carried a clue. In the heart of the Amazon rainforest, a team of researchers had been investigating mysterious changes in the environment. They had noted unusual electromagnetic activity in the area, but they never expected to uncover the secret that lay hidden in the dense jungle. A small, hidden facility, once thought to be abandoned, had been uncovered. Inside, there were old computers, alien symbols etched into the walls, and a series of documents that, when deciphered, painted a picture of humanity's past that no one could have ever imagined. The documents spoke of an ancient race, an alien species known only as the Sentinels, beings who had been silently observing humanity for thousands of years. The Sentinels were not conquerors. They weren't interested in subjugation or destruction. Instead, they were guardians of something far older than Earth itself, an ancient cosmic order that had once been threatened by humanity's own reckless behavior. These beings had watched from the shadows, hoping that humanity would change, hoping that the countless warnings over the centuries would be heeded. But now, it seemed, the time for waiting was over. Back in the United States, Daniel had managed to get his hands on the decoded message from the Amazon facility. His fingers trembled as he read the translated text aloud to his group of friends, who were gathered in his apartment, trying to make sense of the events unfolding around them. This is impossible," Daniel muttered as he scrolled through the pages. "The Sentinels are an ancient race. They've been monitoring us for millennia. And according to these documents, they'd been waiting for humanity to make a critical choice." His friend, Ethan, looked over his shoulder, his voice filled with disbelief. "Are you saying these Sentinels are behind the attacks? That they're the ones who sent the message?" "I don't know," Daniel replied, shaking his head. "But it looks like they're the ones we've been provoking all along. And now they've had enough." The more they uncovered, the more disturbing the truth became. The Sentinels were not the only ones observing Earth. For centuries, humanity's actions had been sending signals into space, signals that carried with them the energy of war, pollution, and chaos. The more destructive the human race became, the more attention it drew. And the Sentinels were not the only ones watching. Other forces, more sinister and aggressive, had also taken notice. Daniel's group pieced together what they could from the fragmented documents. The Sentinels had tried to intervene in the past, but their efforts had been met with resistance. They had tried to guide humanity away from self-destruction, but every time they intervened, humanity grew more aggressive. They had become afraid that if humanity continued down this path, they would eventually destroy the very fabric of the universe itself. While Daniel and his friends were making these revelations, the rest of the world continued to suffer. The attacks were escalating. It wasn't just military bases and cities that were being targeted anymore. Whole sections of the atmosphere were beginning to flicker and distort, as if being manipulated by an outside force. The once stable weather systems began to break down. Hurricanes, earthquakes, and even strange electrical storms began to ravage the planet. The Sentinels were not just interested in punishing humanity. They were trying to stop the catastrophe from spreading to the universe itself. The energy humanity had been emitting had reached dangerous levels, attracting even worse threats from distant parts of the cosmos. The Sentinels had been tasked with preventing this, even if it meant eliminating humanity to preserve the greater balance. And so the attacks continued. Cities were darkened by mysterious electromagnetic pulses. Technology that humanity had come to rely on began to fail in ways that seemed impossible. But it wasn't just the Sentinels causing these events. The forces that they were trying to protect the universe from had begun to make their presence known. On the 5th day after the attacks had begun, a new message appeared. It was far more direct than the first one. This time, there was no cryptic warning or strange symbols. Instead, the message read, "We have given you warnings for millennia. You have ignored us. Now, there is no choice. The universe demands balance." As soon as the message hit the airwaves, the whole world froze. It was clear now that the Sentinels were not only watching, they were making their final move. The power that had been building for centuries was now about to be unleashed. The final battle was approaching, but it wasn't going to be a simple fight for survival. It was a battle to determine whether humanity could prove it was worthy of existence, or whether the Sentinels would be forced to eradicate them to restore the balance of the universe. It was a fight for humanity's soul, a test of whether they could learn from their mistakes, or whether they would be destroyed for their inability to change. In the darkened streets of New York, Daniel and his friends tried to come to terms with the truth. The more they learned, the more they realized how dire the situation had become. If humanity didn't find a way to change, to stop their self-destructive path, they would be wiped out. The Sentinels would see to it. But there was still hope, faint though it was. If humanity could unite, if they could prove that they were capable of change, perhaps they could avoid the terrible fate awaiting them. But time was running out. The final reckoning was near, and the world was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. Who were the Sentinels? And more importantly, would humanity survive the trials they were about to face? The answers were coming, and soon, the world would know whether they had learned enough to save themselves, or if they were doomed to extinction. The world was unraveling. There was no denying it anymore. With each passing day, civilization slipped further into chaos. The once proud cities, which stood as symbols of human achievement, now lay broken and abandoned. The attacks from the mysterious Sentinels had continued, each one more devastating than the last. And with the cryptic message from earlier ringing in their minds, humanity faced the harsh truth. Time was running out. In a small, dimly lit room deep within a military command center, Daniel and his group sat, staring at the screen in front of them. The documents they had uncovered from the Amazon facility were sprawled across the table, the ancient symbols now beginning to make sense. They had learned enough to know that the Sentinels were not enemies, at least not in the way they had feared. They were trying to protect the universe from a disaster of humanity's own making. But it was too late to turn back the clock. The damage had been done. What can we do? Ethan's voice broke the silence. The Sentinels are already acting, and everything we're seeing, everything we've learned, it's like we've already crossed a line. Is there even a way to stop them? Daniel shook his head, frustration bubbling inside him. I don't know, Ethan. I really don't. But there has to be something. The Sentinels have been waiting for us to change, to evolve. If they're here now, it means we failed. We failed to listen to their warnings. We failed to stop ourselves. You're saying it's too late? Maria asked, her voice trembling. Daniel paused, his fingers tapping nervously on the table. Maybe. But I won't give up. If we can show the Sentinels we can change, we might stand a chance. Outside the command center, the sky had grown eerily dark. swirling with ominous clouds that seemed to shift and pulse. It wasn't a storm, at least not in the way people understood storms. It was as if the atmosphere itself was being twisted by forces beyond their control. The electromagnetic pulses that had been disrupting technology around the globe were only getting stronger. Entire cities were now without power. Communication was all but impossible, and even the internet had become a fractured network of broken connections. In the United Kingdom, a team of military experts had gathered to discuss their next move. They had tried everything: nuclear options, high-tech defenses, even advanced countermeasures that had been developed for just such an occasion. But each attempt to retaliate or defend had ended in failure. The Sentinels were always one step ahead. And now, it seemed, they were no longer holding back. General James Blackwood, a seasoned military leader, stood at the head of the room, his face grim. "The time for defense is over. We need to figure out how to stop them before they decide to eradicate us." A young officer raised his hand. "Sir, there are reports coming in from the Middle East. People are saying that the Sentinels are speaking to them, offering a choice." General Blackwood looked at the officer, his brow furrowing. "What kind of choice?" They say it's a decision between survival or annihilation. That humanity must prove it is capable of change, that we can unite and live in peace. Otherwise, the Sentinels will take matters into their own hands." Blackwood's face tightened. "This isn't just about power anymore. It's about something deeper. If they're giving us a choice, they still believe in us. At least, they want to. But how can we possibly show that we've changed?" Meanwhile, in cities across the globe, people were in a state of panic. It wasn't just the attacks that scared them. It was the realization that there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The Sentinels were everywhere, watching, waiting, and with each passing hour, the choice became clearer. Humanity had to change, or face annihilation. In the ruins of New York, Daniel stood on the rooftop of a building, staring out over the empty streets below. The city that had once been alive with movement and energy was now eerily silent. The few survivors still roaming the streets looked as if they had already given up. People were starting to turn on each other. They were scared. They didn't understand what was happening. They didn't know what to do. For Daniel, it felt as though the world had come to a halt. The truth was inescapable. The Sentinels had been right. Humanity had ignored the warnings, acted recklessly, and now they were being forced to pay the price. But there was still a flicker of hope. If humanity could unite, if they could show that they were capable of change, perhaps they could earn the Sentinels' mercy. It wasn't long before the Sentinels made their move. Around the globe, entire cities were encased in a shimmering energy field. No one could get in, no one could get out. The Sentinels had begun their final assessment. The world held its breath. What would happen next? Back in the underground command center, Daniel had finally made a decision. "We need to send a message," he said, his voice resolute. "If the Sentinels believe we can change, then we need to show them. Not with weapons or violence, but with something that proves we can do better." Maria looked at him, her face pale. "A message?" "Yes," Daniel replied, his mind racing. "A message of unity, of peace. We need to show the world that we can come together, not just as nations, but as one human race. We can't fight this with force. We need to fight it with our willingness to change." As Daniel and his group began drafting their message, the world seemed to pause. For the first time since the attacks began, there was a sense of collective purpose, a realization that humanity had to put aside its differences and come together before it was too late. But as they worked, the sky above them darkened further, and an unearthly hum filled the air. The Sentinels were waiting, watching, and the time to prove humanity's worth was running out. The message that Daniel and his group were preparing wasn't just words. It was a last-ditch effort to survive. It was the ultimate test of humanity's potential to change. If they failed, it would be the end. As the sun began to set, the world held its breath. The final reckoning was at hand. The Sentinels were ready to make their judgment. Would humanity show the wisdom, the humility, the strength to change? Or would they face the consequences of their failure? The answer would come soon. And when it did, the future of humanity would be decided once and for all. The world was on the brink. Every moment felt like an eternity. The streets of once bustling cities now lay in ruin, and the air was heavy with an eerie silence. People were trapped in their own fear, paralyzed by the thought of what was coming. The Sentinels had given humanity a choice: change or face annihilation. The time for waiting was over. The final test was at hand. In the heart of New York, Daniel and his friends sat in the dim light of their command center. Their faces were drawn with exhaustion, but their resolve had never been stronger. They had worked tirelessly, crafting the message, trying to make it perfect. It wasn't just a message to the Sentinels. It was a message to the entire world. If humanity was going to survive, they had to come together to show the Sentinels that they were ready to change. "We can't do this alone," Daniel said quietly, his eyes fixed on the screen in front of him. "This has to be a global effort. Every person, every nation, every leader. They all need to hear this." Maria nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "We've seen what happens when we fight each other. The Sentinels were right. We've been at war with ourselves for so long, we forgot that we're all human. If we want to survive, we have to put our differences aside." Ethan, who had been pacing the room nervously, stopped and turned to face the group. "But what if the Sentinels don't believe us? What if they think it's too little, too late?" Daniel looked at him, his expression unwavering. "We don't have a choice. We have to try. This is humanity's last chance." The message they had written was a simple one, but it carried the weight of everything humanity had endured. It was a call for unity, for peace, for cooperation across borders, races, and ideologies. It was a pledge to change, to stop the wars, to heal the planet, and to recognize that they were all in this together. It wasn't just a message, it was a promise. As the message was broadcasted across every channel, every network, and every device on Earth, something extraordinary happened. For the first time in years, people stopped fighting. They put down their weapons. They stopped arguing. They listened. It wasn't perfect. There was still fear, still doubt, still chaos, but it was a start. The world began to come together, piece by piece. But as the message spread, the Sentinels' response was swift. The shimmering energy fields that had surrounded the cities began to pulse with a new intensity. The air crackled with energy, and the earth itself seemed to hum in anticipation. The Sentinels were watching, evaluating, deciding. At first, nothing happened. Then, the ground shook. Daniel and his group watched in horror as the sky overhead darkened once more. The winds howled, and the once still clouds began to swirl violently, as if being stirred by an unseen hand. The Sentinels were making their final move. In the heart of London, a massive holographic figure of a Sentinel appeared in the sky. It was vast, towering over the city like a giant, its form made of swirling energy and light. Its voice echoed across the globe, reaching every corner of the earth. "Humanity," the voice boomed, "you have made your choice. You have chosen to change, to unite, to embrace the future. But your actions must match your words. We will watch you. The time for words is over. Now, the time for action begins." The figure paused, its voice shifting into something more ominous. "If you fail, if you fall back into your old ways, if you allow hatred and war to divide you again, we will intervene. And this time, it will be final." The message from the Sentinels was clear. Humanity had earned a second chance, but it was fragile. They were on probation. The Sentinels had given them an opportunity, but it was up to humanity to prove they could live up to it. Back in New York, the group of friends sat in stunned silence as the message echoed across the globe. They had been heard. The world had been seen. But now, the true test was about to begin. "We've been given a second chance, Maria said quietly, her voice trembling with emotion. "But how do we make sure we don't waste it?" Daniel looked at her, his eyes filled with resolve. "We keep moving forward. We hold each other accountable. We work together. This isn't just about one message. It's about a lasting change." Ethan nodded. "We don't just have to change ourselves. We have to help everyone change. It's going to be hard. It's going to take time. But we can't go back." In the weeks that followed, the world began to slowly heal. The Sentinels had remained watching, their presence always felt, but no longer threatening. The energy fields that had once trapped cities were lifted, and the storms subsided. Slowly, the people of Earth began to rebuild. Nations that had been at war with each other for centuries began to talk, to negotiate. Old enemies put aside their differences, not out of fear, but out of necessity. They understood that humanity could not survive another mistake. The Sentinels were still out there, watching, waiting for humanity to prove that they could be trusted. But change didn't come overnight. It couldn't. The scars of centuries of violence, greed, and hatred ran deep. But for the first time, there was hope. People worked together. They shared resources. They helped rebuild what had been destroyed. The Earth itself began to heal as well, as people turned their attention to the environment, to the damage they had done, and to how they could restore what had been lost. 1 year after the Sentinels had first made contact, the world had changed in ways no one could have predicted. There were still challenges, still hardships, but the spirit of unity was stronger than ever. The Sentinels had left Earth, their task done for the moment, but their presence lingered in the hearts and minds of all who had witnessed their judgment. The message had been clear. Humanity was on the edge, and it was up to them to decide their future. Daniel stood on the rooftop once again, looking out over the city. It was different now, quieter, more peaceful. The skyline, though damaged, had been restored, and people moved through the streets with a new sense of purpose. The world was still alive, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like humanity had a chance. "We did it," Maria said, standing beside him. "We proved we can change." Daniel looked out at the world, the hope in his eyes shining bright. "We did, but we have to keep proving it, every day." And as the sun set on a world forever changed, humanity knew that it had narrowly escaped extinction. But the true test had only just begun. Would they continue to evolve? Or would they once again fall into their old ways? Only time would tell. But for now, the world had been given a second chance, and it was up to humanity to make the most of it. It was a quiet morning when everything changed. The sun rose over the horizon, casting its golden light over the bustling cities and farmlands of Earth. People went about their daily routines, unaware of the storm that was about to strike. No one expected it. No one could have predicted it. It all started with a simple message, a message that would shake the world to its core and change everything forever. It began as an ordinary broadcast. News stations across the globe were used to emergency broadcasts, whether it was warnings about storms, government alerts, or urgent announcements. But this was different. The screen flickered, the airwaves crackled, and then a single sentence appeared in bold red letters: "Stop the conflict, or face the end of civilization." At first, no one knew what to make of it. Was it a prank? Some kind of mistake? People laughed it off, assuming it was just another hoax, another false alarm. But when the message appeared again, this time on every screen, on every device, in every corner of the world, the laughter quickly died. Governments, military leaders, and scientists scrambled to find out where the message was coming from. But they couldn't. It wasn't from any known country, group, or organization. There were no signatures, no signals that could trace back to any source on Earth. It was as if it had come from nowhere. The world waited. For days, nothing happened. Some countries dismissed it as a bizarre joke, while others grew nervous. People tried to ignore the growing sense of unease, but something had shifted. The message was impossible to ignore, and the world couldn't help but wonder who was behind it, and what did it mean. Then it happened. The first attack came without warning. A massive explosion ripped through the heart of New York City, sending debris flying and turning the skyline into a cloud of dust and fire. The world watched in horror as the news spread. It wasn't a terrorist attack. It wasn't some rogue nation's missile. It was something else entirely. The devastation was too precise, too controlled. Something powerful, something unimaginable, had struck. It didn't stop there. Over the next few days, other major cities around the world were hit. London, Tokyo, Paris, all were targeted. The attacks were sudden, brutal, and left entire districts in ruins. The world had never seen anything like it. There was no warning, no explanation. The attacks were clean, with no signs of the usual military involvement. No bombs, no missiles, no aircraft. The world was on the edge, and no one knew who to blame. Then came the second message. You have been warned. Stop attacking, or we will stop pretending to be civilized. Now, the world understood. This wasn't just some random message. It was a declaration. Whoever, or whatever, was behind these attacks had made it clear that the world's endless conflicts and wars had pushed them to the edge. The world was on the brink of annihilation, and it was humanity's own doing. Daniel, a former soldier who had once fought in the world's wars, stared at the screen in disbelief. He had seen violence up close, lived through the horrors of war, and now the world was facing something even worse. He had spent years fighting for a world that now seemed to be on the verge of destruction. He had heard rumors of strange sightings, unexplained phenomena, but never had he imagined that something like this was possible. What do we do now? Maria, his close friend and former comrade, asked, her voice shaky. Maria had been by his side through thick and thin, and she shared his sense of dread. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. I don't know. We've never faced anything like this before. Whatever this is, it's not human. And we've pushed them too far. Ethan, another member of their team, looked out the window of their makeshift command center, his expression grim. We've been warned. We either stop fighting or we lose everything. The world's leaders, too, were scrambling for answers. Emergency meetings were held in every major city, and yet no one had any clear answers. The attacks continued, and the threat of even more destruction loomed over the planet. The world had never been so divided, and now, it seemed, the consequences of that division were coming home to roost. It was then that the world learned of the Sentinels, the mysterious beings who had sent the messages. No one knew exactly who they were, but they were watching. They had been watching for a long time, observing humanity's every move. The Sentinels had seen the wars, the suffering, and the endless cycles of violence. And now they had decided to act.